Tell me about Roots. What is it that you and your colleagues are looking at?
Well, with Roots, it's a kindergarten math intervention, and it's really designed to help students develop understanding of whole numbers. And we're really focused on, as kids transition from preschool or home settings to kindergarten, that students that maybe come in and don't have a full understanding of number or number systems, as they encounter that for the first time, it can be really difficult for them. So we try to smooth that transition by providing a targeted intervention to help support their math development.
Why is it so critical for them before entering kindergarten? Why is it so important for them to have that concept already on hand?
Sometimes people think it's a little bit early, but one thing we know about math development is that trajectories that are established in kindergarten tend to be relatively stable across the later elementary grades. So students that perform poorly in kindergarten tend to be the same students that are performing poorly in 3rd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, and so on. On the flip side of that, kids that get off to a really good start in early mathematics, that have strong number sense and understanding of whole numbers, those kids, they tend to stay on track. So if they get off to a good start in kindergarten, they're likely to be successful in the later elementary grades as they transition to more complex math content.
Walk me through the intervention. What do you have the students do?
The intervention is 50 lessons. The lessons are about 20 minutes each, and it's delivered in small groups, usually between 2 to 5 students and an interventionist. And the students engage with a number of different math activities that are designed to teach really critical concepts around counting cardinality, around understanding place value. The idea is that you can put numbers together, take numbers apart. And so they'll have 4 or 5 activities per lesson. The activities are about 4 or 5 minutes each. And they work very directly with the teacher to learn the material. The teacher's using lots of different manipulatives that the kids can also utilize. And the teacher's providing them lots of opportunities to respond and feedback as the kids are responding to learn the content.
If you could tell me about the study.
We've done a pretty large-scale study of the Roots program, and we did it in sites here in Oregon, but also in Boston, Massachusetts. And across the different sites, we found a couple of interesting findings. One, our primary research question was whether or not the program was effective compared to business as usual, and we found really strong results on a range of measures for kids that received the program. We also did a secondary analysis of comparing treatment groups. So we had students in 2 student groups or 5 student groups get the program to see whether or not the small group was better. We actually found out that the groups did the same, which was pretty interesting from our perspective because it meant that you could get the same outcome for kids even using a larger small group. And that has implications for how schools might think about designing interventions and delivering interventions. We also looked at whether or not the program was more or less effective for kids with lower initial skills. So if you came into the Roots intervention and you had a greater degree of risk, we actually found those kids got the most benefit from the program. They had the highest outcomes at post-test, so that was another finding. The last area that we really examined that we think is of interest is we looked at results with English language learners, so students whose second language is English, and whether or not they had a positive impact from the program as well. And we found positive impact for English language learners through the use of the Roots program.
With the Roots program intervention, is it always in smaller groups?
Most often it's delivered in small groups, and in kindergarten that's usually anywhere from 2 to 5 students, and they're working fairly directly with either their teacher or an instructional assistant who's delivering the intervention. We haven't formally tested its use with a whole class. We have had some districts decide to use the program that way because they serve a lot of kids that are at risk, and so they think it would be a beneficial program to use with all their students. We just haven't formally studied it that way.
The students that do take part in it, how do you find those kids? Are they always the kids that are at risk?
So what we typically do is within each classroom, we identify 10 students who are at risk in mathematics, and we do that through a screening process. And then in our research studies, we randomly assign the students to either a 2-student small group, a 5-student small group, or control. And that's how we test it. So we usually are taking about the lowest 40% of students in a typical kindergarten classroom. If you think there's 25 kids in a classroom, we're usually working with the 10 lowest and then randomly assigning them to one of those conditions.
And how do you find who are the lowest scoring? Is there a test that you conduct?
Yeah, we use two screening instruments. One is called the number sense brief, and that's having students do lots of different activities with whole numbers and sort of assessing their number sense. And then we use a brief screening tool called Aspens, which is a series of 1-minute measures that kids do things like compare quantities or fill in a missing number. They do that for a minute, we get a score, and we combine those two to get an overall risk score. And the students that score the lowest on those two measures combined are those that we serve in the Roots groups.
Can you give me some examples of in the classroom, what kind of techniques are used in the Roots intervention program?
One of the things that we do in the program is we use what's called a concrete, semi-concrete, abstract teaching sequence. So when kids are first introduced to a concept, they're using lots of manipulatives. So if they're doing an activity where they're learning that 10 ones make a 10, they're working with 10 cubes that they can put together to make a 110 unit. And then eventually we transfer that to looking at tally marks or something that represents that abstractly. And then eventually they see the number 10 and they have a good idea of what that sort of concept is, the number 10. Other things that we use within our programs is we take a very scaffolded approach where the teacher is modeling the concepts first for the students, and then they're engaging in the concepts together, and then eventually the students are practicing it on their own. We also like to build in lots of opportunities for kids to respond to teacher questions and to verbalize their mathematical thinking. So a big concern for math development and intervention programs is making sure that kids get the chance to explain their math reasoning and get feedback from the teacher to make sure that they're, one, explaining their math thinking, using vocabulary correctly, getting lots of opportunities to respond, so the teachers sort of really engage with them in sort of a back and forth as they're answering questions and explaining their mathematical thinking.
For parents at home, how can they use this information to help their kids understand these basic math skills at home?
Outside of using something that's a formal program, the biggest thing is to realize that around you in the world are tons and tons of different opportunities for you to engage in mathematics with your child. It could be something as simple as doing a recipe at home and focusing on the measurement aspect of that, or counting the number of stairs that you're going up or down to build sort of early addition and subtraction. It could be getting students to, or getting their child to think about numbers nested inside other numbers. So getting them to see that a 5 is made up of a 1 and a 4 or a 2 and a 3 together. So just really trying to leverage any opportunity you have to talk about mathematics with your child is really sort of critical. And that helps facilitate their transition from the home environment to the school environment. Well, they'll be doing that in a more formal way, but if they have sort of these informal skills and they've been talking about math at home, it's going to make that transition a lot easier for them.
For teachers, what are some challenges that they might run into implementing this into their classroom?
One of the biggest challenges is always time. Teachers have to sort of deal with finite amounts of time to address a number of skills: social emotional learning, literacy, mathematics. So really what we encourage teachers to do and schools to do is to try to work collaboratively to come up with an intervention time block where they can implement effective interventions to get kids on the right track. Because the program is only 20 minutes a lesson and there's 50 lessons, what schools and teachers typically do is they deliver it in the back half of the year, and they try to carve out a 20-minute intervention block to do that across 10 to 12 weeks. And so we think that that investment of time is hopefully going to pay off down the road when the kids are in first grade, second grade, third grade, and now they have a solid foundation in number to learn more advanced content.
Is there something that maybe the teachers didn't learn during formal training for the Roots intervention that you wish that they should know now?
I think one of the things that's really important is the idea of fidelity to the program, making sure that it's being implemented as intended. One of the things that we try to do is try to make the use of the manipulatives and the curriculum and sort of interactions with students. We try to provide that with a lot of support through professional development and through coaching. And so what we found is that teachers get a little bit more facile or have an easier time implementing the program the further along they go in the program. And so there tends to be sort of a bump from the first year implementing it to the second year implementing it. So the idea of really trying to learn the nuances of the program and then just getting lots of practice and chances to implement it tend to lead to better outcomes for kids.
Have you followed the kids that took part in the Roots program and see how they're doing beyond elementary school?
We haven't. The first round of kiddos are probably in third, fourth, or fifth grade now, depending on when the study was started. But that's something that we would love to do. We're sort of constrained by budget, but yeah, the end goal would be definitely to see if we made a long-term impact. One of the things that's really complicated about math is that the content gets increasingly complex as kids go. So it may be that eventually you're looking at linking together intervention programs across grade levels to make sure that kids that maybe come in with some risk are supported throughout elementary school. So one of the goals of our research group and something that we're doing with IES funding is we've also developed a first grade program and we've developed a sixth grade program. And so we're trying to create a system from kindergarten through sixth grade to support math development all the way through elementary school.
For teachers, how can they get buy-in from the school administrators?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is important for teachers is to sell the idea, just like we've done with early literacy, of you invest time and effort and energy into early intervention or prevention, and that pays dividends down the road. One thing that we know that's true in both reading and math is that it's much more difficult and expensive to remediate difficulties after they're established. So if you're waiting until third grade or fourth grade to intervene, it's going to be harder and it's going to be more expensive. So taking the time and money to invest in early intervention and prevention helps to sort of alleviate having to deal with remediation down the road.
And what would you want policymakers to know?
Probably the same thing, that we have windows that are high leverage to intervene with children in their development when it's critical. And in math, there's really two areas in elementary school that are really critical. When they first come into school in kindergarten and they're dealing with formal mathematics for the first time, that's a really critical window. The other critical window is when they start to encounter fractions and rational numbers for the first time around third or fourth grade, and that's another critical window. And so from a policy standpoint, if we can leverage those windows and do a really good job during those windows of development, we make the later mathematics so much easier. So taking, building policy that really supports those critical windows should pay lots of dividends down the road.
How many kids enter kindergarten not knowing those basic math concepts?
Yeah, you have to sometimes work a little bit backwards, but anywhere from 40 to 50% of kids are going to be at risk. And that really varies by the community. You'll have some communities where maybe 10% of the kids will be at risk. And then other communities, you might have 70 or 80% of the kids at risk. At a national level, it's usually typically around 40% of kids that come in with some degree of risk that we think it's important to intervene with those kids immediately. But it can vary quite a bit by the community that you're in.